Hello, everyone. We are going to work on finishing your assignment 7, which is your exploded axonometric diagram of the Farnsworth house. You already have the image of the house being exploded into the various components. What we want to add are arrows, labels, and then also dashed lines to represent the roof plane matching and lining up with the floor plane. So let me go ahead and minimize here. We are going to be working in Adobe Illustrator in order to create that diagram and finish up the graphic. So from adobe.com, you are going to go to Creativity and Design in the horizontal navigation bar. If you're not already signed into your Creative Cloud account, please do so. From here, you're going to look for Illustrator. I'm going to click there. It's under Featured Products. And Illustrator is designed for vector graphics. A vector graphic is, for example, a graphic that you can make as large as you want and as little as, or as small as you want without impacting the resolution, the quality of the image. In contrast, something you create in Photoshop, those are rasterized files. So if you make it bigger than what it was originally designed for, you start to see pixelation. Okay, so vector files, this is really good for logos, for supplemental graphics on portfolios, but we use Illustrator a lot also for presentation boards and diagrams. You can make it as large as you want, as small as you want without compromising the quality of the graphics. Now, if you're creating a presentation board and you add rasterized images, then that's different because the rasterized image will have an impact on the pixelation based on how large you make it. But when it comes to any graphics that you create in Illustrator, those can be as big or as small as you want. So Illustrator, if you haven't already downloaded it, please go ahead and do so. Here are just some examples of what you can do in Illustrator. You can scale, you can use different colors, you can change font faces, you can create labels and graphics, work with different colors. It's a great tool you definitely want to become familiar with. There's prices here, but again, as a student, you have access. Make sure you're using your district account. All right, so that is Illustrator. Let me go ahead and open it up. Okay, so here we have just a splash screen going over what's new. You can also learn some tools and tricks. I'm going to close this one out at the moment. And when you open up Illustrator, it has already a few templates where you can get started. We're going to go ahead and start a new file. So on the upper left-hand side, go ahead and click on New File. And because the projects you've worked on previously for this class were 11 by 17, we're going to do that here too. We're going to work on an 11 by 17 document. So you can see if you can find an 11 by 17 here. Sometimes you'll find a preset for it, but if not to fret, you can just type it in. So we're working in inches, 11 by 17, we want the orientation to be landscape, so horizontal. The height would be 11, the width would be 17, and then the title for this document, first initial, first name, last name, underscore A7. And then for here, when it comes to the color mode, CMYK mode is designed for print. Now, depending on the application, if you are printing it, you want it CMYK mode. If it's strictly going to be for digital purposes, then you want RGB. If you're not sure, you can start off with CMYK and then you could always change it. Also, when it comes to resolution, here the highest is 300 points per inch, and this is, or pixels per inch. This is if you were printing on paper, you want that 300 ppi or dpi. If it's strictly for view online or on a screen, then you would want 72 ppi. We're going to keep it at 300 ppi because we can always make it less. It's harder to make it more later on. All right, let's go ahead and hit create. Okay, so here we have a blank canvas, right? This is a board. In Illustrator, they're called boards. You have your application menu up here above. Now I see an options bar here. You may not. By default, if you've never used Illustrator before, it's going to look like this. Essentials is the workspace menu by default, but we want to change that. So on the upper right-hand side, you have a rectangle, which looks like it has a vertical rectangle on the left-hand side. It says switch workplaces. If you click there, look for Essentials Classic. Now you're going to have this options bar. You have your tools bar. You have your properties panel, your layers panel over here, your status bar below. So we're definitely going to be using these options. We want to use layers as well. If you don't see your layers panel, notice how it's these little, it looks like two sheets of paper, one stacked on the other. That's what it looks like if you can't find it. If you go to your window menu, look for layers. Okay, and it'll appear there. All right. A few more things when it comes to navigation here. If you want a ruler in order for you to measure margins, making sure that you don't go over, so that depending on your printer that you're using, that you have proper bleed. The keyboard shortcut is Control R, R as in rulers. So make sure, oh, sorry, there you go, Control R. So you see the rulers here popping up. And then if you want the grid, it's Control apostrophe. Notice how the grid, the darker gray is at a 1 inch increment. And then the lighter gray, these are broken down to smaller squares that are 8 of them. So they're an 1/8 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch by 1/8 of an inch. This is really great. So for example, if you wanted to add guides to make sure you didn't go beyond, let's say 1/2 inch all the way around so that it can print without, if you don't have access to a borderless printer, you don't want to go all the way to the edge, you could potentially drag and drop guides to make sure you stay within that boundary. So let's practice that. This first layer, double click it, call it guides, enter. And then what I'm going to go ahead and do, you can use the grid to snap to grid. If you go to the view menu and then go to, see little arrows pointing down right here, snap to grid. I'm going to click on that to turn it on. I'm going to left click, hold and drag, and then I'm going to release and I'm going to add a guide. Remember how I mentioned each one of these little squares is an 1/8 of an inch. So 4 of them would be 1/2 an inch. And I'm going to go ahead and do that all the way around just to make sure I don't accidentally go beyond that in case we were to print this. Depending on the printer, maybe you can go up to 1/4 of an inch to the edge, but I'm just going to do 1/2 an inch all the way around. Okay, so again, I left clicked on the ruler, left click, hold and drag to pull down your guides. Once you're satisfied, once you have your guides, you can go ahead and lock them in your layers panel to the right hand side of the little eye, which turns on the visibility of your layer. If you click there in that void, that is going to lock your layer. So the eyeball is for visibility, the little lock is for editing within that layer. Okay. Next, we're going to bring in our image, the one that we created for assignment 7. At the very bottom of your layers panel, you can create new layer. There's a plus sign there to the left of the trash can. The plus sign inside of a square, if you click there, creates a new layer. And then what I'm going to go ahead and add here, I'm just going to call it image so I know what I'm bringing in. I'm going to go to the file menu, place, and I want to go ahead and look for assignment 7. I want to look for that image, hit place, and then notice how it's stuck to my cursor. If I left click, it's going to place it. Now, it looks a little fuzzy right now, and part of that is due to the fact that Illustrator will reduce the resolution of your images in order to make your computer run faster. So don't be alarmed. Once you save this as a PDF or as a JPEG, when you look at it, that's what the final resolution will look like. Here, what I want to go ahead and do is I want to see if I can make this a little bit larger. I'm just left clicking, moving it over to one side. I want to left click, hold and drag the opposite side, holding down shift to constrain the proportion. Oop. As far as I can go, I want to make that as large as possible. Okay, that might be a little too big for what I'm looking for. As you recall, when you were all working on your projects that you did by hand, the assignments that you did by hand, I had you keep clear some space down below so that you could add a label or title if you chose to do so. So right now, this one's just a little too large. I'm going to make this smaller. I'm holding down Shift and reducing the scale. Reducing the scale here. I might use the top two, let's see, 1 inch. I might do 2 inches for a title bar. Maybe something like this, we'll see. Okay. Whenever you bring in an image, once you place it, you scaled it, you know where you want to put it, make sure you embed that image. This is so important. If you forget everything else, remember this. You must embed every image you bring into Illustrator. Okay, I'm going to click there to embed it. What does that mean? If you were to save this Illustrator file and then work on it in a different computer, for example, and try to pull it up, this image is not going to appear because that image was saved in a different location on that computer. So if you don't save the file along with all the graphics that you use and move them around together, then you're going to lose that information. It's going to ask if you want to replace it, then you have to look for it, and hopefully you have it somewhere. If you embed it, it does increase the file size, but it makes sure that it keeps your information here. Okay, so really important to embed your images. All right, I have the image. I'm going to go ahead and lock that. I'm going to create a new layer here. And then this is for the portion of the diagram. I'm going to add arrows, and then I'm going to add text, and then dash lines. So I can call this graphics. And then I'm going to do another one for text. So I'm going to start with the graphics one. I'm going to highlight that, make sure it's active. And for this, I am going to use the line tool. So within the rectangle tool, notice how there's a little arrow pointing on the lower right-hand side. That means it is a well. If I right click, there are more tools inside, right? So wherever I see that little triangle on the lower right-hand side, I know there's a well with more tools. If I right click on my rectangle tool, I see a line segment tool. So I can use that. And I'm going to go ahead and draw lines. Now, right now, it looks like I have a line there, right? But if I deselect, it disappears. Why? Well, notice how over here, when it comes to color, the stroke and the fill are blank. I'm going to have to add a color there. So the stroke is the outline, the fill is on the inside. So the stroke here, if I double click, I can choose a color, right, of my liking, any color here. I'm just going to choose black, hit OK. Oh, let's see. Here, let me just choose a different color. All right, red, for example. Right, and you see it. Let me change that color. Let's do a black. There we go. So it shows now. Okay. Now it's a really thin line. You may choose to change the stroke, which is the thickness, up here in your options bar. So let's see, I might use a 3. That might be a little too much. Maybe a 2.5. That might be a little bit better. I'm going to bring it up a little bit higher so it meets that corner. And I'm going to move it a little to the left. Okay. Now this line is going to serve as an arrow. I want an arrowhead here and just pointing to this, and I'm going to add a label there. To add an arrowhead with the line selected, I want to go ahead and look at my stroke options in my panels. Now I don't see it here, and you may or may not see it on yours, but if you don't, go to your Windows menu, Window, and look for stroke. Okay, it looks like this. I'm going to bring it up here and attach it to the top. Hide that. So stroke here. I want to make this, I want to add an arrowhead. So I'm going to go ahead and click on my arrowheads, and I'm going to choose an arrowhead from here. See, like that. Now you can also change the scale of your arrowhead if you're not satisfied with that. Say if you want something a little bit bigger, you can change it, right? Or make it smaller. You can definitely do that. I'm going to keep it at where it was at 100, but you can choose whatever you'd like. Okay. Now we have an arrow. Great. We need text. Let me go to the layers panel. Again, it looks like two pieces of paper. I'm going to click on the text layer. And in my tools panel, I'm going to look for the letter T. That's my type tool. I'm going to go ahead and click there. And I'm going to left click. And then I'm going to go ahead and start typing. This is my roof plane. Now that text is way too small. I want to double click within that area and go to my options bar so I can change it. Now by default, the font is Myriad Pro. In the graphic design world, some call this the lazy man's font because it's default, right? You didn't take the time to change it. So I'd like you to take a look and see what other options there are. There's so many options when it comes to font faces. Find something that's going to work with how you're designing the rest of your portfolio. Maybe you have some font faces in mind that you're already thinking about using. And if you're not sure, if you're not 100% positive of the direction you're going to go in, maybe you use something a little bit more standard like Arial. You could always come back and change it later if you want to. So I'm going to double click that. I want to make this larger as well. So maybe like an 18-point font. Now it's really high. I'm going to use the arrowhead to go down to move it lower. Okay, roof plane. All right, there is one. And this line's reading a little bit too thick with the font. So let's try that. Let's do it too. Okay, with these two done, what I want to go ahead and do, I'm going to copy this down to here for the I-beams. And I'm going to copy it for the glazing, copy it for we have our ground plane and floor plane. So in order to make a copy, go ahead and left click, hold and drag to make your selection. Then if you hold down the Alt key, Alt, Alt, and if you hover over what you want to copy, notice how now I have a black arrowhead and a white arrowhead. Well, if I left click and hold Shift, keep it straight, I can make a copy. Again, hold down Alt, hold down Shift, and then you can make a copy. If you accidentally deselect one, just reselect them. And now it's going to be easier for you to go in there and change the text. So this, you may want to call them I-beam columns or steel I-beam columns, right? It's up to you how you want to denote that. I'm not using any other materials, so maybe I just keep it as I-beam columns. Glazing, if I can spell right. Floor plane. And ground plane. So another thing, if you accidentally click and create a text box that you didn't mean to select, just go to your black arrowhead and then delete it. But I'm going to come back in here. If you do make a mistake with the text, notice how it's giving me the little red squiggly line, letting me know, hey, there's an error in your spelling. There is a spell check embedded into Illustrator. If you go to Edit, you're going to find Spelling, Auto Spell Check. I have it selected right now, but there's Check Spelling as well. You can say, go ahead and start, and then it's going to give you some options. Hey, did you mean this? And then you can change it there if you'd like, or ignore. Okay. Always use spell check before you submit your work. All right, how's it looking? Looking all right thus far? Okay. So we have our arrowheads, we have our labels. The only other thing I want us to add are the dashed lines to show that the roof plane corresponds with the dimensions of the floor plane. Now I no longer need the text at this time, so I'm going to go ahead and lock that. Okay. Now, when it comes to the graphics, I want to add those dashed lines. I'm going to use my line tool. I want to make sure I'm in the graphics layer. If you're in a locked layer by accident, notice how it won't let you draw anything. So I want to make sure I'm in an open layer, and I'm just going to left click, hold, and drag. Now notice how they're not lining up. Let me zoom in here. And that's because I had snap to grid on, and those corners don't align with the grid. So I need to go back to my view menu, uncheck snap to grid so that I can work off of this. And then I'm going to come use my arrowheads to move it over. And then as of right now, notice it disappeared. Why? Because by default, it went back to no color. But notice how I remember what color swatches I used earlier. So I can click on that black, and then I could switch instead of the fill, make it the stroke by clicking on these two little arrowheads here. So there's one. I can hold down Alt, and then I can left click, hold down Alt, left click to add then Alt, left click. Now in the back, you're not going to see everything, so I'm going to make this a little bit smaller, so you're not going to see the entire thing. And then this one's going to be a little shorter. And this one's going to come in a little bit, be a little bit shorter. Okay. Now let's make these dashed lines. To select these 4 lines, either you can click each one, hold down Shift to select multiple, or you can left click, hold, and drag to create a window. And then we're going to look for the stroke panel. Again, if you don't see the stroke panel, which looks like 3 lines with a gradient of thickness, you can go to your window menu and then click on stroke to make sure it's active. So here I'm going to select all 4, and then notice how I have a dashed line option. I'm going to check that. And then you can manipulate the size of the dashes and the sizes of the gaps. If you want the dashes and gaps to be equal, then you only have to manipulate 1. So let's say if I wanted to make this a little bit smaller, see what that looks like. Maybe that's a little too busy. I'm going to hit Control-0 so I can see the entire document. And I'm going to turn off the grid, Control apostrophe, and turn off my guides, Control semicolon. And let's see how that looks. Let me move this over a little bit. It's not too bad. It's a little busy. So maybe we do something more along the lines of, let's see, an 8-point. No, maybe a 10-point. Maybe a 10-point will suffice here. Again, what we're representing is just that the dimensions of the roof plane correspond to those of the floor plane. And we're highlighting these various structural elements of the Farnsworth house. Okay. Now here I can choose to add a graphic down below and add a title if I'd like. That is definitely an option. But the way you're going to be working with your portfolio this semester, you may choose to, or you may choose not to. Okay. So with that being said, for right now, I'm not going to add a graphic down here below. I'm going to leave it as is. I'm not going to put a graphic down below, but I may decide to change that later. Okay. All right. So once this graphic is ready to go, again, you get to choose your arrowheads, the style of arrowheads, how far out you want your arrowheads. I wanted to center this information here. I have the arrows, the text. I have my dashed lines. So what I'd like to go ahead and do next, save your file. Make sure you're saving. Now you do have the option to save to Creative Cloud or save to your computer. If you have the room on your computer, I suggest you save it onto your computer. But if you have, if you don't have enough space, if some of these files get a little big, then you could save it onto the Creative Cloud if you choose to, or you can save it on both. It's up to you. Just make sure you know how to access it. But once you save the AI file, the Adobe Illustrator file, you need to export this as a JPEG. And we're going to look at ways of doing that, okay? If we do File, Export, Export As, and we look at JPEG, we have first initial, first name, last name, underscore A7, the one that we did together from SketchUp. We have that one already. So I'm going to go ahead and put an underscore. I'm just going to type in diagram so that we can see this. It's saving as CMYK mode because that's what we set it as. The highest quality here is 12. I'm going to hit OK. Now, if we open up this file, when you export a JPEG from Illustrator, let's see, it's really working on it. Let me open it up. Oh, it's a little hard to see here. What it does when you export a JPEG just directly like that, it'll restrict it to where you have content. So the JPEG, notice how it's smaller. I'm zoomed out completely. It's smaller than the actual document, than all of this. It's missing all of this white space. It didn't include it. So what I'd like to do is in my layers panel, I'm going to lock the graphics layer. I'm going to open a new layer. Double click it. I'm going to call it border. You can call it margin. Either one, border or margin. I'm going to draw a rectangle. Oh, not the gradient, sorry. Rectangle where the line tool is. I'm going to snap to grid. Go from 0, 0 to the other side there. Now, it currently has a black line, a black outline there, and it has my dash lines. It has that setting because that was the last thing I did. I'm going to uncheck that. But I want this to be clear. So it looks like there's nothing there. I'm going to save the file, Control S. I could tell it wasn't saved because there's a little asterisk after the AI. Now let's do a file, export, export as, and I'm going to try diagram 2 so we can compare. Maximum quality of 12. Let me go ahead and open these so we can see the difference. Notice this one here, it's zoomed into it, even though it's 100% scale, because it restrained it to, or constrained it only to where there was actual content, versus when we added that imaginary border, now it's the size of the graphic. Okay, so whenever you are creating a JPEG from an Illustrator file, just don't forget that if you have white space, you're going to have a blank border or a clear border going all the way around so that it's the dimension that you actually want it to be. All right. Now that you saved this file, then your JPEG is ready to go for the portfolio. All right. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.